بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أما بعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء. صدق الله العظيم. Allah tells us that it's the ulama, those who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who have knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that it's only they who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made a special, we can find many ahadith on the virtues of knowledge, but he made a special dua for those who learn, they study, they internalize, and then they pass on the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A special dua for them. Allah said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, نَدَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً. May Allah keep fresh the face of the one, a man or a woman, the one. سَمِعَ he heard our hadith, he recorded it, memorized it, and then he passed it on. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam made a special dua. Now, the hadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is one of the sources of Islam. It's one of the pillars of Islam. Okay? But it's one of the sources of Islamic law. So you can imagine, it's something that's one of the sources of the Sharia, of legislation. It's going to hold importance. Right? Now, out of all of the ahadith that we have, and all of the ahadith books and the scholars of hadith, there's hardly any Muslim that doesn't know about or hasn't heard about Imam Al-Bukhari and the Sahih Al-Bukhari. Right? Imam Al-Bukhari and the Sahih of Imam Al-Bukhari. Right? Who has heard of the Sahih Al-Bukhari? Just the word Sahih Al-Bukhari. Who's heard of this? Yeah? And who's heard of the Imam Al-Bukhari? Yeah? And who's heard of the saying, you've heard the saying Sahih Hadith, Da'if Hadith, weak Hadith, it's a fabricated Hadith, right? You've heard these terms. But what does it mean? Right? And why, if someone says Sahih Bukhari, why does it mean that, okay, why do we just accept it? Right? You hear the word Sahih Bukhari, say, okay, this is authentic. Well, what makes it authentic? What was so special about the Sahih Bukhari and its author, Imam Al-Bukhari? This is a question, and I'm sure that's come inside your mind, and inshallah ta'ala, in this series of halaqas, today I want to start by looking at a few brief glimpses into the life of Imam Al-Bukhari. Right? And now I'm not going to get into his personal life, although I'll mention some stuff, but I want to look at his academic life. Yeah? Now, the Sahih Bukhari isn't the only work that Imam Bukhari wrote. He also has many other important works. Right? Other important works other than the Sahih. And it wasn't his first work. Right? He wrote this after compiling his other works. But he has one of the greatest legacies of any scholar in Islam. One of the greatest legacies. Right? But to understand Imam Al-Bukhari's legacy, to really understand, we have to, and why was his work so impactful, we have to go back to his time and his era, and to understand what was going on. Okay? Now, what was his era? Well, Imam Al-Bukhari was born in the year 194 of the Islamic year, which is just at the end of the second century, right? And his time was a very, very different time to us. Why was it different? Because Imam Bukhari, he lived in the golden age of Islam, right? Islam had golden ages in different parts. He had golden age in Spain. He had golden age in Baghdad. Right? He had the golden age of the Ottomans in Turkey. So it's had different golden ages in different regions at different times. Right? Imam Al-Bukhari lived in the time of when the Abbasid Caliphate was at its strongest. It was the superpower at the time. And just before he was born actually 1 year after the famous Islamic Khalif, King Harun al-Rashid. Who's heard of his name? Harun al-Rashid. You might have heard of some stories about him, some words of wisdom, etc., etc. right? Anyone heard of Harun Rashid? Right? Well, you've heard of it. Okay, that's great. That tells me that it's time to perhaps do a halaqah on Harun Rashid sometime in the future, inshallah ta'ala, if no one's heard of him. Right? So he was born just a year after Harun Rashid. And he died in the year, so he was born in what year? 190? 194. And he died in the year 256. Right? How old does that make him? Quick maths. That makes him 62? Are you sure?
What year did you say? 194?
Yeah.
What year did he die?
256. Are you sure? I'm just confusing him, messing with you. Yes, 62. So he lived for 62 years. Well, Jazakallah khairan. And in his life, he saw approximately 9 or 10 Abbasid Khalifs come and go. Right? At its peak, the Abbasid Khilafah, it ruled about 4.29 million square miles, which was larger than the Roman Empire. Larger than the Roman Empire. And in fact, at a time, the Roman Empire was giving jizya to the Abbasids. Jizya it's like a safety tax, right? That we will be, we'll have some negotiations. So it was giving a safety tax to them, jizya to them. Now, it wasn't the Abbasids who conquered all these lands. It was before them, the Umayyads, right? People like to, criticize the Umayyads and stuff, and they had some issues with them, no doubt. But they also were the superpower who led Islamic conquest. Now, in the time of Imam Al-Bukhari, what you see is that the Abbasids, they are the superpower of the time. They are the superpower. First of all, in terms of military, in terms of politics, they're the superpower. But what's more important than military and everything else is that the 3rd century, right? This was the time where the Islamic golden age in terms of knowledge occurs. This was the time where the greatest scholars of tafsir were there. This was the time where the greatest scholars of hadith were there. Imam Al-Bukhari and the other 5 authors, they all produced the works in this time. This was the time where the Islamic schools, the madhahib, the fiqh schools, they were compiled and they begin to spread. This was a time where the scholars of tarikh, of history were writing, the scholars of grammar, right? This was a time, not just in terms of Islamic knowledge, but also the Khalifs were funding the translations of all of the great works from Hindi, Farsi, Greek, wherever any of the great works existed in philosophy, right, in medicine, right, in logic, whatever the great works were, the Khalifs were literally paying in gold to have them translated into Arabic, right? And in the year 215, this was when the famous Baytul Hikmah, the house of knowledge, was established in Baghdad. What was the Baytul Hikmah? The Baytul Hikmah was an Islamic university, as we can understand, right? And this was completely funded by the royal family, and whoever wanted to come can come and study whatever they like. All the knowledge of the world was here in the Baytul Hikmah, right? So the picture I'm trying to give you is that the 3rd century was the time of the revival of knowledge, and this was the golden age in every single regard that you can think of. In every single way, this was the golden age, right? And this was when Imam Al-Bukhari was writing, and he was learning, he was teaching, right? Now, first of all, what is his name? His name is not Al-Bukhari. Right? That was not the name his dad, his father gave him. Right? His name is Muhammad bin Ismail. Muhammad, the son of Ismail. Al-Bukhari is the place he's from. We're from the UK. We call ourselves British. Okay? So when someone's from, someone who's from Makkah, I'll call them Makki. Okay? Someone who's from Bukhara, He was placed from a place in Bukhara, in modern-day Uzbekistan. That's why he's called Bukhari, because he belonged to Bukhara, and he was from Bukhara. Now, he himself is Muhammad. His father's name is Ismail. His grandfather's name is Ibrahim. Right? His great-grandfather's name is Mughira. And his great-great-grandfather's name is Bardizbah. Now this is important. Why am I mentioning this? Because it was Bardizbah, who's his great-great-grandfather, who died. He was a Persian Zoroastrian. Okay? What we call a Majusi. And he died upon this. It was Mughira, Imam Al-Bukhari's great-grandfather, who accepted Islam. When the city was conquered in the time of the Sahaba. And this is when he accepted Islam. Right? And now you can imagine, subhanAllah, he himself accepts Islam, and his great-grandchild becomes what? One of the greatest scholars of Islam. Right? There's a lesson for us to think about here. Right? He himself probably couldn't ever imagine that this is what's going to come out of my progeny. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed his progeny. That today we remember Mughira because of Imam Bukhari. Otherwise, who would have known him? Who would have known about him? Right? We also have to think that, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, from my children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, create scholars, create pious people, good Muslims. At least keep them firm upon Islam. Because we don't know. 100 years time, 200 years time, we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our children are upon Islam, but we don't know what could happen to them. Now, Bukhara was an important area, and it was part of a very important road. Right? It was part of the Silk Road, what's known as the Silk Road. The Silk Road Bukhara it played an important role in terms of business, trade, and knowledge, and in terms of knowledge as well. Right? It played an important role. And this was first conquered actually in the reign of Muawiyah radiallahu anhu in the year 54. Right? And this is where Imam Al-Bukhari himself, he comes. So this makes Imam Bukhari the fourth generation of Muslim. Just the fourth generation of Muslim. His father was Ismail. His father himself was a businessman who built a significant amount of wealth for himself, and he himself was engaged in learning of hadith. Right? He wasn't so famous for this, but he did take part in learning hadith. Okay, so he met some of the great scholars such as Imam Al-Malik. He spent time with him, he heard hadith from him, and later scholars also included him as being part of the reliable narrators of hadith. Like Ibn Hibban included him part of the thiqah, the reliable narrators. Now, he himself was a businessman, and indeed a very, very honest and a pious businessman. On his deathbed he said, لا أعلم من مالي درهما من حرام ولا درهما من شبهة. He said, I don't know all the wealth I have, I don't know a single haram coin. A single haram coin. Okay, haram coin is this far. He said, I don't know a single coin from doubtful sources. Shubha. There's some doubt about this. I don't know a single. Alhamdulillah. Right? There's a lesson for us to learn here. We want our children to be pious. We have to become like the father of Imam Al-Bukhari. We can't feed our children haram and then expect them to become the next Bukhari. It's not going to happen. Right? It's not going to happen. You can't feed your children haram, not care about the source, and then expect great things from them. Except if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes. Right? We have to strive for halal wealth, feed our children halal, and then have great hopes from them. Not feed them haram and then have great hopes from them. It's not going to happen. Now, Imam Al-Bukhari's father, he passed away when Imam Bukhari was, really, really young. And he was raised by his mother, who was a very pious lady. Not a scholar, but a very pious lady who raised Imam Bukhari by herself after his father's death. When Imam Bukhari was young, just a child, 6, 7 years old, he lost his eyesight, completely lost it. And his mother began to, day and night, make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Day and night. And one night she saw a dream in which the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam came to her, and he said to her, because of your weeping, your crying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has returned your son's sight. Because of your weeping and your crying, your dua for him. Right? And in the morning, when Imam Bukhari woke up, he could see. Right? Who says that dua can't do this? Who says that it can't do this? We don't have the yaqeen. We don't make the effort in our du'as, and then we say, what's dua going to do? It's not going to do anything. Right? But Ibrahim told her, because of your weeping, your crying, your dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returned this. His eyesight. Now, when he was really young, his mother sent Imam Bukhari to as we can understand, a small primary school, or a small madrasa, where there's one teacher and he teaches how to read and write. Right? And he spent a few years with them. But while he was young, Imam Bukhari says, whilst I was still with the teacher, he's teaching me how to read and write, as we send our kids to reception primary, he said, I was inspired to learn hadith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just inspired me to learn hadith. Right? And while he was with the teacher at the primary school, he began learning hadith. Now there's something interesting about Imam Bukhari. Imam Al-Bukhari, one of his famous teachers is Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Right? Who's heard of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal? Right? He's one of the founders of one of the schools of fiqh. One of the greatest scholars of Islam. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, one of his closest teachers is Imam Al-Shafi'i. Who's heard of Imam Shafi'i? Right? Again, one of the founders of the founder of the Shafi'i school, and one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Right? So you have 3 generations of scholars. Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu, his student Imam Ahmad, his student Imam Al-Bukhari. Now what's interesting is, all 3 scholars, they were raised by single mothers. All 3, they lost their father at a very young age. Single mothers, they raised them. And do you think single mothers at the time, they had the benefits that we have now? They had the social care and stuff now? No. Right? Women didn't work. They had no source of income. It was just the husband or the father was providing. So you just imagine yourself how difficult of a childhood they must have had. Right? But you know what? All 3 of them, despite being raised by single mothers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them the greatest. Just imagine what kind of tarbiyah these mothers did. Their fathers weren't involved. Of course, they passed away young. But what kind of amazing tarbiyah these mothers did. Whatever circumstance we get put into life, we can't control it. Oftentimes we can't control it. Right? But there's hope in every single situation. There's hope. There's hope. It's just that we got to look, attend to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and make dua to Him, and put the effort in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open up the doors for us. His mother raised Imam Al-Bukhari by herself. They say that the mother is the first madrasa, the first school. Right? And the most important school is the mother. Because children have more attachment to mothers than they do the fathers, especially when they're younger. Right? Because oftentimes mothers are more softer. Okay? They show more love and more lenient. So children are more attached to mothers. Right? This is a time while children are young to really spend time with them, to give them that tarbiyah, give them that upbringing. Because if we don't use this time when they're with you, if we don't use this time properly, then later on it becomes very difficult to do the tarbiyah. Now on the other hand, what we see is, what happens is children, they get sent from a very young age, they get sent to go and spend 6, 7, 8 hours a day with people who have no tarbiyah, people who don't even have iman, people often don't have any akhlaq, any adab. no manners, they don't know basic etiquettes, right? And people just left to go and spend years with them. Can you understand how much damage this can possibly do to children? Right? What kind of upbringing it's going to have, and what kind of effect it's going to have on children? Right? The children's first few years of their life, this is the time to spend as much time as possible with them. Now, Imam Al-Bukhari, going back to Imam Al-Bukhari, from a young age, there were visible signs of him being a genius, a total genius. Right? First of all, he himself says that while he was studying with the teachers, learning to read and write, he was inspired hadith, and he began to memorize hadith. When he was 10 years old, yeah, he would go to the different hadith masters of hadith in his town, and he would go and study. So he went to one of his teachers, and his teacher was narrating hadith. And in them days, how you narrate a hadith was not from a book. There were no published books. There were no Sahih Bukhari. It was a teacher would have his own personal notes that he's collected in his travels, in his studies, that he's learned from his teachers. And you would have to narrate this with your chain. That I heard this hadith from this authority, who heard it from this authority, from this Sahabi, from the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you didn't have a chain, it means nothing. Your hadith means nothing. The chain is the authority. If you can't present who you took the hadith from, who your authorities are, nobody was interested, no one's going to listen to you. Okay? So his teacher is narrating. He says, I heard the hadith from Ibrahim, from Abu Zubair, from a certain narrator. So he said, I heard the hadith from Ibrahim, from Abu Zubair, from Ibrahim. So Imam Bukhari, he's 10 years old, and he objects to this. And he says, you've made a mistake. It's incorrect. 10 years old. You can imagine, right? One of the children stand up and say, no, Imam, you're wrong. Right? I'll be taken back, of course, right? So his teacher's taken back. Said, who are you? You telling me I'm wrong? Why am I wrong? So Imam Bukhari, look at his bravery. He's so confident in himself. No, he said, no, you're wrong. He said, go and check your notes. Right? So he checks his notes, and he realizes he's made an error. So he asks Imam Bukhari, he says, tell me what is the mistake that I've done. So Imam Al-Bukhari tells him that it's not Abu Zubair from Ibrahim, it's Zubair bin Adi from Ibrahim. Look how precise it was. Okay? That he even told him exactly what his mistake was. In fact, when Imam Al-Bukhari was still a child, one of his famous teachers is a narrator, a scholar by the name of Muhammad bin Salam Al-Bikandi. He himself says that, whenever he comes to my gathering, this child, he says Sabiyan, child, whenever he comes to my gathering, I begin to get worried. I start getting worried. And while he's there, I'm always in fear. If you're in fear that, you're going to make a mistake. Okay? This only comes if there is people more knowledgeable than you, right, in front of you. If there's no one more knowledgeable than you, then, there's nothing for him to fear. Because no one's going to realize the mistake. Everyone's going to trust him. But he himself says, whenever this child comes, I'm in fear of making a mistake. Right? Once, one of his students, by the name of Sulaim bin Mujahid, said, I came to Muhammad bin Salam al-Bikandi. And I came to him and he said, listen, if you had just come 5 minutes before, I would have showed you a child who's memorized 70,000 hadith. 70,000 hadith, a child. And Imam Bukhari, later someone mentioned this to him, and he laughed and he said, listen, 70,000? He said, I had memorized more than 70,000 by then. Right? And, there are so many other stories of him, his early signs of him being a genius. Right? I honestly sometimes meet very intelligent young people. Very intelligent. Right? And I feel sad for them. Why? Because their intelligence is not being used in the correct way. Right? We have this false understanding that intelligence is only academic, intelligence, right? Or be academically sharp or well-read, right? If that was the case, then most people in history were not intelligent, right? They never went to school. But we learn from people of the past who were far more intelligent than us. We have children, we might sometimes see children very sharp, very intelligent in certain things. We just have to, bring out their intelligence and help them flourish in that field. It's not important that every single child has to do well in maths. Everyone has to, your child has to be a doctor or he has to be an engineer. No, it doesn't have to be like this, right? Let's overcome this way of thinking. Okay. Now, Imam Al-Bukhari, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's known about him is that in his personal life and in his academic life, he had piety. He was a very, very pious person. As Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءِ. It's only the scholars who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who fear Him. Right? And knowledge is something that is supposed to increase us make us become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, if it doesn't take us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's nothing but information. And there will be nobody, right, more pious than the computers. Right? Because the computers have far more information than we do. Right? But it doesn't. Real knowledge, what we call ilm nafi', is what the Sahaba had. Most of the Sahaba were not scholars. They were not jurists. Most of them were not great narrators of hadith, right? Their knowledge of Islam, how many hadith do we find where some group of Sahaba come from far, they spend few weeks with the Prophet ﷺ and then they go back, right? There's only so much they learn in the few weeks. Maybe the basics of Islam, about Salah, the basics of Hajj, that's it. But what kind of status did they have? What great status did the Sahaba have? Right? We can't even imagine. Why? Because their knowledge increased them in Iman. Yeah? And this is the real purpose of knowledge, to increase us in Iman. So, Imam Al-Bukhari, first of all, in his academic works, in his entire Sahih Bukhari, he says, I did not place a single hadith in there without first of all taking a ghusl and then praying 2 rakat, making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah accept this work from me. Right? And there are more than 7,000 hadith in there. So you can just imagine, the Sahih Bukhari was not written in 2 weeks, a year, 2 years. No, it was his lifelong project. The first completion was done over 16 years. And after that he began to teach and teach and teach. He spent the rest of his life teaching this. So you can imagine what kind of effort he put inside the Sahih Bukhari. His worship was the stuff of legend. In Ramadan, Imam Al-Bukhari would recite one Quran during the day, and after the Taraweeh prayer, right, in the time of suhoor, he would make one khatam every 3 days in Salah. So every single night, he would recite a third of the Quran, 10 juz from the Quran. Right? Now, Imam Al-Bukhari, he says that the day I found out that backbiting destroys a person, I have never done backbiting. Every child knows about backbiting, don't they? So we can say from the time he was a child, he says that I have never backbited anyone. And I hope to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and says, perhaps Allah will hold me accountable for other sins, but for the sin of backbiting, I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never hold me accountable for this. Right? There's an incident of Imam Al-Bukhari, after he became famous and his knowledge spread. He was once traveling on the ship, and there was a passenger on the ship who became close to Imam Al-Bukhari. Right? He began spending time with him, and perhaps even listening to a hadith from him, taking knowledge from him, and became quite close to him. And when you're traveling with someone and you become close, you begin to tell each other things, right? So Imam Bukhari began to open up, and he told him that I've got some gold coins on me. I've got a bag, and it has 1,000 gold coins. So this person, he became greedy for this, and one night he woke from his sleep, And he was screaming, shouting, slapping himself, beating himself, right? Saying, I'm at loss, I've lost everything, So people are curious, what's going on? Right? And he's making noise and he's tearing his clothes. And no one knows, Imam Bukhari hadn't told anyone else other than this person. So he says, I had a bag of gold coins, 1,000 gold coins, exactly the same amount, and I've lost it. Someone's taken this. So people begin to search, go after one person to the next, to the next. No one knows that this is Bukhari's. Right? He never had this. It was only Imam Bukhari. He was hoping, I'm going to create a scene, right? And if I say the exact number, right, people will become on my side. So Imam Bukhari says, he got the gold coin, the bag, and he threw it into the ocean, into the sea. Can you imagine how much money that was? How much that was worth? 1,000 gold coins. This is a small fortune, literally. Now they even searched Imam Al-Bukhari's things, and nobody found anything. So this person, he became ashamed, and perhaps he went to him and apologized. He said, what did you do with the bag? Imam Bukhari says, he said, listen, you're talking about 1,000 gold coins? He said, I spent my entire life, right, gathering a reputation, gathering this work, and I built my reputation. People trusted me. You think I'm going to throw all of that away just for a bit of money? Right? To save himself from any kind of doubt, Imam Bukhari got rid of it. So people don't even, perhaps if Imam Bukhari said, no, you're lying, right? Who would have believed this guy? Would anyone believe him over Al-Bukhari? But just to save himself from that doubt coming to his mind, anyone's mind, he got rid of it. Just like the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was once walking with two of his wives, or one of his wives. He was walking and it was nighttime. And at nighttime, you can't see someone from far, but you can see the shadow and you can make out the face. So when the Sahaba, they saw him, and they saw the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with his wife. And of course, when someone's with the wife, you don't go up to them and say, what's going on, right? Start chatting to them. You leave them be, isn't it? That's basic manners. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him back. He said, come back, come back, come back. He said, this is my wife, right? It's just her. And this man said, Ya Rasulullah, I can't even ever imagine having doubts about you. But the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, he said, listen, shaitan runs through people's blood, through people, just like blood runs in their veins. Shaitan comes and he can place doubt. So to save himself from doubt, he got rid of all of this. Right? This was his taqwa. Now, one of his students, he describes Imam Bukhari with three characteristics. Number one, qalilul kalam. He was someone who spoke little. Only things of benefit. Someone's always opening the mouth. Why? Because the more you open your mouth, the more mistakes you're going to make, and the more trouble you're going to cause. Number two, he describes him, كَانَ لَا يَطْمَعُ مَا عِنْدَ النَّاسِ. He wasn't interested in the things that people were interested in. The things that people are competing for, right? That's not his competition. Okay? When, so often do you hear about, siblings competing with each other. Right? My brother just got a car, I have to get a better car. He just, upgraded his house, I have to upgrade my house. Right? His son got, 5 A stars, my son has to get 5 A stars. Right? People compete like this. And this is what causes rivalries. But this is not what interested Imam Al-Bukhari. He was not competing for the things that people had. And number three, he wasn't busy in the matters that people were busy in. People were busy in what? In gathering wealth, right? Building houses, right? But that's not what he was busy with. His entire life, he was busy in seeking and teaching knowledge. Now, Imam Al-Bukhari, how exactly did he seek knowledge? And how did he get to the level that he did? One of the traditions of the scholars of the past was that they would spend time traveling for knowledge. It's what we call rihla fi talab al-hadith, or fi talab al-ilm. Rihla, and you find many of the scholars of the past writing books, compiling books on this, seeking traveling to seek knowledge. Why? Because in the olden days, each city, each town, they only had a certain amount of knowledge. Yeah? They didn't have knowledge of everything. In order to increase in knowledge, you had to travel. Right? You have to go to the different places and gather the knowledge of that place. Imam Al-Bukhari himself was someone who spent majority of his life seeking knowledge, in traveling for knowledge. As a teenager, Imam Al-Bukhari, by the time he was 16, he had learned everything that was available to him. He had memorized all of the books that were available to him. Right? There was nothing else left for him. And by that time he even passed his own teachers of his town. He passed them. So when he became 16, he traveled for Hajj. And traveling for Hajj, this was the way often scholars would go and seek knowledge. Why? Because the scholars of the world were traveling for Hajj. And the best meeting place was the Hajj. Right? So people would go and they would spend not a few weeks or a few months, rather they would sometimes spend years in Mecca, in Medina, seeking and studying with them. So he went at the age of 16, he went with his mother and his brother. His mother and brother performed the Hajj and they returned. And Imam Al-Bukhari, he decided, I'm going to stay and study and seek knowledge. And he begins to write his book, his first book, at the age of 18. What is this book? This book is a biographical dictionary of every single individual who narrated hadith from the time of the Sahaba till his time. From the time of the Sahaba till his time. Right? You can imagine, and this includes thousands and thousands of individuals. This is his first book. And this book is published, it's still, alhamdulillah, preserved. And this book is in several volumes. But do you know what age he writes this book? At the age of 18. Right? What are we doing at the age of 18? Not just this. This book that he compiled at the age of 18, this becomes one of the key points of references for every single scholar after him in the science of biographies of narrators. It becomes one of the key points of references. It becomes like an encyclopedia, right? And he spent the rest of his life traveling, only returning home in his hometown near the end of his life. He traveled to Syria. Where was he from? He was from Uzbekistan, yeah? He traveled to Syria, Palestine, Hijaz, Kufa, Basra, Baghdad, Jazair, Khurasan, Mecca, Medina, and other places. And many of these places multiple times. Right? And he himself says, لَقِيتُ أَكْثَرْ مِنْ أَلْفِ رَجُلٍ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ قَرًا بَعْدَ قَرْنٍ. He says, I met more than 1,000 raters of people, the people of knowledge, generation after generation. Right? His teachers that he took knowledge from were in their thousands. Not one or two or three. Most of us, our teacher is the one who taught us in masjid, in maktab, who taught us the Qaida of Quran. That's it. And then we don't ever take. And then we think, we're too old now, we don't need teachers. In fact, we need teachers. We need teachers for the rest of our life. We need teachers. Right? Alhamdulillah, I graduated from the Alimiya course in 2015. But since then, there's not been a time where I've not been studying with a teacher. Right? I'm teaching myself. I teach students myself. But I have teachers because we need teachers. And Imam Bukhari, what made him so great was his teachers. He studied with the greatest teachers of any generation of Islam. Of any generation of Islam. And this is a great lesson for us. If we want to become something, we want to do something great in life, we want to achieve something, we have to be around men and people who are great, who achieve something themselves. If we spend our life around mediocre people, people who have no life goals, who've done nothing with their life, what are we going to do? Are you going to have any high hopes? If we don't show our children, okay, listen, life is far greater than our 9-to-5 jobs, careers, and that's it. Right? There's a purpose to life, and there's so much that we can achieve. If we don't show, and if we don't have someone to show us, you know, a lot, who doesn't feel like that, you know what, there's more I can achieve from my life than what I'm currently doing? Who hasn't had this feeling in their life? Yeah? But then you don't know sometimes. Sometimes you can, okay, how do I do this? How do I get more out of life? Right? One of those ways is having a teacher. A teacher could be, you know, in many different ways. A guide, someone to guide you on the way, someone to, you know, just nudge you in the right way, a mentor. This is really, really important. And you know what? There's, you know, mashallah, a few young men here. The most important time of your life that you are going to need a mentor, you know what it is? It's from the ages of 16, when you finish high school, before this. But from the age of 16, normally, what happens? You'll have more independence, you'll realize. Yeah? Your parents will give you more independence. You'll probably get a part-time job. You'll start getting your car. You know, you can do more things. But this is the time to make and break. If you are from the age of 16 till 30, 35, 40, if you don't have a mentor with you at every single stage, right, you're going to be, there are great chances that you'll become lost. You need to have a mentor with you. You need to find a mentor who's going to guide you. One thing is Islamic mentor, right? But also, you know, the teachers we have at university, colleges, right? These are people who guide us towards a good career, isn't it? But we want mentors beyond just a career. So Imam Al-Bukhari, one of his, what makes him so great is the great teachers he had. The great teachers he had. Qarn al-Ba'd, you know, generation after generation, he studied with the greatest of teachers. His teachers, from them, over his lifespan, he studied and he memorized. He collected a pool of 600,000 hadith. It's 600,000 hadith. Right? That's not a small amount. That's not a small amount. From the 600,000 hadith, he chose the most authentic 7,000 plus hadith and he placed inside his Sahih Bukhari. Right? So you can just imagine how great of a work this was. Now Imam Bukhari was someone whose fame spread at a very, very young age. Imam al-Subki and Imam Dhahabi, they say that Imam al-Bukhari حدث البخاري بالحجاز والعراق وخراسان وما وراءنا وكتب عنه وما في وجهه شعر. He's narrated hadith in Bukhara, in Hijaz, Iraq, Khurasan, ma wara nahr, at an age where he didn't even have a single hair on his face. Not a single hair, and he began to narrate hadith. People were taking hadith from him. And you can pinpoint to exactly when, I won't go into details, but you can pinpoint to the age of 18. By the time he was 18 years old, he was narrating hadith. His fame began to spread, that there's a great master of hadith, a young master of hadith. And Imam Bukhari, though his teachers were some of the greats of his generation, they themselves became overwhelmed by Bukhari. They became overwhelmed by him. Now, one of his teachers, Ishaq ibn Rahway, he was dictating hadith, and Ishaq ibn Rahway was one of the great scholars of fiqh and one of the greatest scholars of our tradition. He was narrating hadith and Imam Bukhari was sitting. So he's looking at Bukhari and he tells people, just because he's sitting and rating, don't be deceived by this. Right? He's far more superior than me. Ishaq ibn Rahway. Right? Do you understand how much this, no teacher tells, no teachers, masters don't go and tell everyone that, my students are better than me. You don't do this. Right? But you just have to understand how much humility it takes for someone to tell everyone that no, he's far more superior than me. His teachers would say that Bukhari has never seen anyone like himself. Bukhari has never seen anyone like himself. So who were his teachers? Just very briefly, and we're going to stop here inshallah ta'ala, and we'll continue in the next. I promise that I'm going to keep 35 minutes halaqah, not no more. But I'm sure I've gone over by 5 minutes or so. But khair, we'll stop here. So Imam Bukhari had over more than 1,000 teachers that over his lifetime he learnt, memorized, preserved 600,000 hadith from. Just the Sahih al-Bukhari, a hadith that he heard from over 300 teachers. So Imam Bukhari is not someone who's working by himself. It's just some man sitting down writing whatever comes to his mind. It's not like this, right? It's a work. First of all, he's working, is standing on the shoulders of giants, right? And he's working on the back of the great tradition of hadith scholarship that's before him. His teachers are of 5 levels. His most senior teacher are themselves the tabi'in, the generation who came after the tabi'un. The tabi'un are those who saw the Sahaba. Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, the tabi'un. His teachers are those who came after who were from those who studied with the tabi'un. Between Imam Al-Bukhari and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, normally there's 4 or 5 narrators, but his shortest chain is of 3 narrators between himself and Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So between him, his teacher would be his teacher, a tabi'i, a sahabi. You can just see how close he is to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? This is the highest level of his teachers. Then it's a level below that. They were those who were from they were from the generation of his teachers who saw the tabi'un, right? But they themselves didn't hear from the most superior, the most greatest of the tabi'un. Right? Just a level below them. They perhaps narrated from the younger tabi'un, the junior ones, but not from the most senior and superior ones. But both of these teachers were from the generation of what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, khairul qurun. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, khairul quruni qarni. The best of generation is my generation, the Sahaba. This is why we love the Sahaba. We honor them. Anyone who curses the Sahaba, criticizes the Sahaba, we say they're misguided. Any of the Sahaba, no matter what happened between the Sahaba, it's our job as believers that we respect them, love them. Why? Because the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, my generation is the best generation. They said, ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يُلُونَ, those after them, and then those after them. So the best of generation were the 3. The Sahaba, Tabi'un, and those who saw them. Imam Al-Bukhari's highest level of teachers were those who studied with the last generation of the best of generations. That's a great honor for Imam Al-Bukhari himself. Then comes the middle level of teachers. And this includes the likes of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Right? This was the generation who didn't meet the Tabi'un. We don't say that they were from the Tabi'in. Okay? But they narrated from those after them. Right? And then comes his peers. He would often, any hadith that he missed from his teachers, but he found in someone of his generation who were his contemporary, he narrated from them. And finally, he even narrated from his students. Rarely was there a hadith that one of his students had that Imam Bukhari did not have. Or Imam Bukhari had the hadith, but not through this chain. And he would make sure that he has attained the chain from this student as well. Like one of his students is the great Abu Isa At-Tirmidhi, right? One of the authors of the 6 famous books of hadith, the Sunnah At-Tirmidhi. In fact, Imam Al-Bukhari, all of the apart from Ibn Majah, all five of, so the rest of the books of hadith, 6 books of hadith, they are students of Imam Al-Bukhari. Imam Muslim, of his Sahih Muslim, he's a student of Imam Al-Bukhari. In fact, when he met Imam Al-Bukhari, Muslim was himself a master of hadith, and he had finished writing his book. When he met Imam Al-Bukhari, he said, "Oh, master of muhaddithin, allow me to kiss your feet." Right? He himself, by this time he had finished his book, compiled, but when he met him, he realized the greatness of Imam Bukhari. He said, "Please allow me to kiss your feet." Right? He was a student. Abu Dawood is a student. Abu Isa Tirmidhi is a student. And Imam An-Nasa'i is also his direct student. Right? They themselves are students of Imam Al-Bukhari. But Imam Al-Bukhari himself was more senior and more superior to all of these. And this itself is a great honor for Imam Bukhari. And as I said, his fame spread from a very young age. And as you say, someone's fame it precedes them. Such was the case with Imam Bukhari. But it wasn't the case that, because of his fame, he lived a life of riches, a life of ease. Just like with every famous person, Imam Al-Bukhari himself, near the end of his life, he went through very, very difficult trials, which eventually led to his death. Right? He himself went through very, very difficult trials. Inshallah ta'ala, in our next halaqah, we'll look at what were these difficult trials that he went through, and we'll look at some of his other works, and a bit of what is the Sahih Al-Bukhari. Inshallah ta'ala, our next halaqah will be next Saturday. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beneficial knowledge, to make us amongst the generation who revive Islamic knowledge, who learn, who seek, and who also teach knowledge. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to thank and to reward Imam Al-Bukhari and all of the scholars of our Islamic history for the efforts that they made. And it's because of their efforts that Islam is alive. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لنا ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو التواب الرحيم.